Every honeybee fills with jealousy when they see you out with me. You're much sweeter.
It's safe to say that we would not be sitting here today if it weren't for Erin Forbes. Erin was my mentor. I actually met her before I was a beekeeper at a South Portland City Council meeting, and she made a tremendous impact on me, talking before the City Council about the ordinance that was being penned at that time. I took her class. She became my mentor. I was that beginner beekeeping student who would just send her emails in the middle of the night, having no idea what I was supposed to be doing. She just has such an infectious love for this craft that it can't help but rub off on you. And it rubbed off on me, as you can tell, in kind of a big way. When we were getting ready to brainstorm the business plan for the honey exchange, Erin was absolutely integral in that. So literally, she's a part of the honey exchange from before you even never heard about it. She's a wonderful teacher. She has a style all her own, and I feel fortunate to consider her my dear friend. Erin Forbes.
I have not always been a beekeeper. I became a beekeeper in 2001, actually, when my husband adopted 2 colonies of bees on a whim. And frankly, I knew nothing about them at all. I knew that bees and plants got along good and had something to do with flowers and fruit. And I said, great, have fun with that. You know, let me know what you need. And so that began my husband's little journey with the beekeeping. He got his 2 colonies, he set them up himself, and the 3 of them had a pretty good time that first summer, did pretty decent. And I would check in just slightly, but for the most part, it wasn't my gig. So then along comes the winter. And I have always been the animal husbandry department in my family. And so, you know, January came and the temperature dropped down to the single digits, and I thought, oh my God, there's just no way that anybody can be alive out there, which I think, frankly, every Mainer thinks for about 6 weeks every winter. And that's when I began reading about the honeybees. And so that began my path of really beginning to learn. The next spring, they made it through fine, miraculously. And I started studying beekeeping very seriously and essentially took over the husbandry of our hives. So that year, our 2 hives swarmed 5 times. We went into the following winter with 7 colonies. And I began the Master Beekeeper program at Cornell, really studying in earnest. And in my 3rd year of beekeeping, I became a Master Beekeeper certified through Eastern Apiculture Society. So fast forward to today, I always like to talk about what my actual operation looks like so people have an understanding. I run about 100 or 150 colonies on the side as my secret life, which frankly isn't really a secret anymore. And in my straight job, which I do actually have a straight job, I'm an accountant. And fortunately, at this stage in my life, I happen to be the Chief Financial and Operating Officer of the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens, which really could not be more aligned with my core values and unique skill sets. But what I'm here to talk about today is honeybees and why they are important and what they bring to our lives. And so I just want to get back to them. This is our apiary at the Botanic Gardens right now. Actually, this is our apiary last spring. We now have 19 hives up there. So this is who we're talking about. The European honeybee. For the most part, when we are talking about honeybees, we're talking about the worker females, although there are also drones and queens in the hive. And the superorganism is amazing. And I literally can talk about the individual organism or the superorganism, as some people in this room know, for probably 14 or 16 hours straight. And so I'm going to try not to go too crazy on that, but it is really fascinating to just look at them for a moment and realize that these tiny little puffs of air are not just vegetarians, but actually flower feeders. The only things they eat are products of flower. So pollen and nectar are only secreted by flowering plants. So they don't eat grass like you think of the regular vegetarians eating the actual plants. They eat the production of the flowers, which is really quite amazing. They're completely covered in hair. They have unique communication skills. They live in a social network. They communicate through smells. They communicate through sounds. They communicate through dancing. We know that they can communicate a number of very complex concepts and also give each other directions. It's absolutely fascinating. And the majority of them are girls. They are tiny. It takes 12 of them to have the same mass as an M&M. And they have the highest predator on the planet. The white man is generally terrified of them. So, like, what's more cool than that? So the complex society that they built, as Bee said, those beautiful combs that they build from their own bodies, the beeswax is secreted from segments of their body as a result of sunlight and nectar. I mean, really, when you start thinking about honeybees, it opens this window to the world where you realize there is so much more coolness in the natural world than anybody could even describe or think about in a whole lifetime. And honeybees are just one little window to that amazing coolness of the world. And so the thing that the bees do that is important to us is that they pollinate plants. It is really them just gathering their own food. They're not doing it to help anybody else. They're doing it to feed themselves. But they and the plants have co-evolved over 50 million years to have this relationship where the plants have grown these flowers to attract the pollinators, and the pollinators have adapted to specialize to the plants. And so this is just a picture of a yard up the street from my house on Kapisic Street in the spring. And the difference between the honeybees that makes them so much more important to us than the other pollinators isn't the honey and the wax, which would have been important to our ancestors thousands of years ago, but really to us, what we are after is that pollination service. And so while other pollinators might see a yard like this and flit from the dandelions to the violas, to the daffodils, and go from one different flower to a different flower, honeybees are specialists. They get obsessed with one particular flower, and they'll go from that flower to another flower to another flower, similar, going from one to the next until they're gone. And so the beauty of that is that they bring the right pollen to the right flower because they're going from one to another. And so, for example, this is an apple blossom with a honeybee on it. And so that honeybee will go from one apple blossom to another, and that results in tons of fruit, which, frankly, to many of us here in Portland and in this community, grow fruit trees in our own gardens or have neighbors with plants and fruit trees and vegetable gardens. And so we benefit from those honeybee colonies. Those honeybee colonies on the roof of the Press Hotel are setting apples and crab apples up on the West End, raining down onto people's lawns. And frankly, people walk by those things and wonder, can I eat that? Like, because nobody's done anything to it. We don't even trust often that that can be eaten just to have natural fruit off the trees. It's kind of crazy. And so here is a picture of a honeybee pollinating a cranberry flower. There's another example of a New England plant that is very important that honeybees contribute to. But frankly, for the people here today and for the people of the Botanic Gardens and our 215,000 visitors that I try to squeak a little bit of information about bees to every day, what we need to know is what honeybees do, the commercial pollinating honeybees do to put the food on our plates. This is a picture of an almond orchard. This is a giant monoculture of almonds. Honeybees, over 90% of commercial colonies in the United States migrate to the almonds every single February. It is the largest bee migration in the history of the world, because prior to now, we haven't had the kind of trucking that we could have used. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands, actually probably more like 1.4 million honeybee colonies are trucked to the almonds every February to do this pollination event. And the reason that that is the truth is because those almonds couldn't set nut without pollinators. And there are no native pollinators that fly early enough in the season to do that work. And even if they did, the monocultures are so vast that the actual span of the orchards is too large for the native species to get across, and they would have no other food when the almonds stop blooming. Not to mention the fact that they'll then need to be sprayed with herbicides and fungicides in order to get those almonds to set up right. And so these are the people who do the work to put those almonds on our plate. These commercial beehives from all over the country, getting woken up from North Dakota and South Dakota and Maine and Florida and dragged to the almonds in February. It's an amazing event, so to speak. We have the second largest commercial pollination event that happens in the United States, happens here in Maine. It's the blueberries. We truck somewhere between 60 and 80,000 colonies of bees to the state of Maine to do pollination here. It's basically the number of colonies is determined by the price of the blueberries, which for the last couple of years has been poor. And so we've got a lot of blueberries in freezer. And so we're decreasing the number of colonies that are coming in to do production. But that's another big thing. We Mainers really appreciate that fact that we're known for blueberries and lobsters. We've got some pretty cool things that we're responsible for, but I think that we often don't realize that there's a whole workforce that does that, that's really important. And those bees come in on pallets, 454 hives on a truck, 60,000 bees, so plus or minus, so just divide that by half. That's quite a few trucks that come up the 295. And if you look long enough or you pay attention, in May, you may see a couple of those trucks either heading up or heading back, particularly if you drive at night. They're the ones that are netted. And so this is the food that we need our bees for. And people, it's what we do with our own stationary colonies here in our own yards and in our own ecosystems is really important, but acknowledging that there is that other field force that is doing all this work for us and trying to make it a better place for them is really important. And it's very self-interested. Much like what I was saying, the bees are not doing pollination for the plant's benefit, they're doing it for their own. We need to help the bees simply for our own benefit, because this is where the real nutrition is in our diets. So bring it back to what colonies look like in Maine and what can we do about it. You know, these wonderful beehives that we have here live really fairly bucolic lives compared to the rest of the United States and frankly the rest of the world. I was just in Montreal a week and a half ago at the largest international beekeeping conference in the world. It happens every other year. 5,500 beekeepers from all over the globe get together every other year and talk about beekeeping and talk about the issues that we're having, the different things that we can do. It's an amazing thing. Beekeepers are great communicators and they're great at sharing information with each other. And so that's a really wonderful and amazing thing to be part of that team, which we are. But what everybody will universally tell you is there's two real issues, back to me being an accountant in beekeeping. Succession planning. It's a huge thing. Like, who is going to take over my beekeeping? Who's going to take over my bee yard? And also getting young people involved, getting real talented help. We need to start teaching young people that beekeeping is an amazing thing to do as both a hobby or a living, and that this is an important profession in the world. Like, we're losing our young scientists. They're getting distracted by their PS4s. And so it's pretty hard to compete with that. But one thing that can compete with a PS4 is real honey and real fascinating looks at the fascinating parts of the world. And this is something that I get to do at the Botanic Gardens. It's quite amazing. Now that I'm Chief Operating Officer, it's hard to get onto my calendar, but one of the things that inevitably does, and I will kick other people right off it for it, is summer camp kids get 2 hours of my time to go do an apiary visit and learn about what is going on the other side of our gardens. They spend 4 or 5 days in the flowers and in the world and discovering the nature illustration camp or doing the pond discovery camps. And then, and then I teach them about the bees and they're like, whoa, these guys have been here this whole time? It's quite amazing. Getting kids right up close with the hives and talking to them about this is something that people can do. The barriers to entry are high. It's hard for young people to be able to afford beekeeping, and so we need to, as beekeepers and as adults, offer opportunities for people to discover, young people to discover these windows into the world. And so I just have a couple of fantastic pictures here of how enthusiastic they are when you get them into the bee yard. They are not afraid. They are fascinated by smoke. They are fascinated by fire, and they are fascinated by honeybees. honeybees and things that will fly. And so it's really fun and exciting. And this is a place where you can go in the world that really does give hope, is to show that the future can discover what we need. None of us are going to live to be more than 100 or so. Like I like to say, like, I'm as smart as I'm ever going to get. Like, literally. I mean, maybe I'll learn a few more things, but then I'm going to start forgetting. I mean, I'm already forgetting some of the things that I know. And so this is the stage at which we need to really share and give other people a leg up. And that is the most important thing that we can do for these people. So, thank you.